first 6 lectures explored 2 great sources, the Slavic and the Sanskrit. Lecture 7 showed how this Sanskrit model moved eastwards. Lecture 8 showed how it moved westwards. The next 2 lectures are to make sense of that body of knowledge that moved westwards. And we'll begin by going back, of course, to India. So in India, we noticed that the moon has a great importance and the downward triangle. Now, I can look, and we noticed that this triangle was used in explaining the phases of the moon, and we can link it with the goddesses Durga, Lakshmi, and Kali. But we can also link it, as we see in this diagram, with the 3 gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, with Ichna, Jnana, and Kriya, with Bindu, Nadu, and Bija, and then 3 so-called bijas or sound syllables, Ham, Wa, and Ksa. And then we can see that we can take the whole of the alphabet and make it into creation, presentation, and dissolution. A to K to Ka is creation. Ka to Tha is presentation or preservation. And Ta to Sa is dissolution. And so that all that notion of the Trinity, which we saw is also linked to the 3 phases of the day, the 3 gods, the 3 energy, the 3 gunas, and so on, now becomes a way of structuring those letters of the alphabet. And instead of just thinking them as tattvas or principles for the construction of the universe, they become tattvas that can be divided into the 3 basic functions that are connected with the 3 gods of the Trimurti. And if we then apply this to the magic square of 5 by 5, then we see we have creation, preservation, dissolution. This is the vowels and the first letter of the Ka Varga. From Ka to Tha gets us the Ka Varga and the Ta Varga. Then we have the Ta Varga, and we end with the Pa Varga. So A, K, T, H. This is vowels, letters 1 to 10, letters 11 to 32 in Sanskrit. In English or in the Latin languages, this is letters 1, letters 11, 12. Sorry, this is still Sanskrit, 1, 11, 12, 21, 22. And in the Western alphabets, this becomes shape 1, shape 11, shape 2, shape 10 in the Arabic, letters 1, letters 11, letters 22, letters 17. And if we take those double letters, remember that we linked with the planets, BGD, KPRT, 6 of those 7, the R is an exception, and that's part of the Ya Varga, but the others all fit in this way. So B, G, D, K, P, T. So here is an attempt to align the Sanskrit letters with their equivalents in Hebrew and show their sequence and so on. Now, there is a story of following the Silk Roads, and I showed you that Old Persian is in fact linked, well, if we think of the Zoroastrian tribes that then become the Zoroastrian nations, it's all to be seen in that context where Sanskrit becomes the basis of Avestan. And one of the ways of writing Avestan is like this. Now, if we think in terms of Sanskrit, the symbols are cuneiform and look totally different than Sanskrit. But if I look here, A, Ka, Ksa, Ga, Ka, here's the Ka Varga. But instead of saying KHA, you say XA, right? Instead of saying GHA or G, you say The ga is the same, the ka is the same, the ta varga, the pa varga, and here ya, ra, la, va, sa, ha. So it's slightly modified, but there is no doubt that this is the model of Sanskrit behind it. And here is another way of writing the language, or again using the hieroglyphs, the cuneiform, which is very different, because here the purpose is to knock it into the stone. But here you have the version which we saw once before. It's called the Pizian alphabet. Here I've just for fun showed the connection. So that's the ka varga, the sa varga, the t, the t, the p. The ya varga is complete, the za varga is complete with the ha. And here you have a blow up now of that Pizian alphabet. So, but instead of having 16 vowels, I now have only 3 vowels with a short and a long version, so I have 6 vowels, yes? And then I don't have any cerebrals, but I have gutturals, palatals, dentals, labials, nasals, semivowels, and sibilants. And I have surds, aspirates, and medials, but that is going into details. But the basic principle of your vargas is still there. This is in the overland route, yes? And then continuing on the overland route, when we get to Babylon, we see the 22-letter alphabet, which, as we saw initially, probably came from Brahmanicum to become the language of Solomon. But then when it gets to Babylon, the habit becomes of writing 2 columns, yes? And the one column is Aleph. I start with A, and then the second column I start with L. And so this becomes A, B, G, D, H, W, Y, H, T, Y, K. And this becomes L, M, N, S, and so on. So this is the Babil Alphabesi, which was developed in Babylon. This is Hebrew. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think that there's not much doubt that this is not just connected, it's like a photocopy. This is Paleo-Hebrew or Ugaritic. The signs, some of the signs are slightly different. This one is the same. The first one is different. The second one is the same, yes? And this is Samaritan. And again, the connection is undoubted. Now, what is very striking and important is that if I look at this, clearly there's a connection. And this, of course, gives me the first 2 letters of the word alpha, A-L, right? Letters 1 and 12. But if I do that, 1, 12, 2, 13, 3, 14, and so on, and now read downwards, then I get A, B, G, D. So the abjad, which is supposed to be a completely different story, right? But now I get an automatic A, B, G, D, H, W, Z, H, T, Y, that whole thing that is supposed to start with the Arabs actually comes from arranging it in these columns. I will come back to this. But it means that there are underlying structures. I touched upon this in my last lecture where I showed you that there were bits of the alphabet like ABCD or ABGD and then KLMN and QRST that are the same across the whole of the Asian or the Eurasian continent. So to put this into a larger context, I take a series of early alphabets. Hanscretanum, which we saw at the end of lecture 2, is ABCD, EFG, HI, KLMN, OP, RST, XZ. Sumerian, ABD, E, F, G, H, I, K, L, M, N, O, P, R, S, 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 T, T, Z. Brahmanicum, A, B, G, D, E, U, Z, H, T, I, K, L, M, N, S, O, P, 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 T, S, T, Q, R, S, H, T, Indicum, A, B, and so on. Indian, Adamaeum, Adami, Chaldean, and Hebrew 3. What we notice again at the point that I made in my last lecture, this column, ABCD or ABGD, this column, KLMN, stays the same everywhere. These two columns change slightly, this changes dramatically, and this one has been the same for the last 4,000 years. Well, it had RST, then it becomes QRS, SHT, but that's whether it's a Sa or a Shah. And then the Babylonian alphabet, the Ugarit, Phoenician, Samaritan, Proto-Hebrew, has this structure: AL, BM, GN, DS, HI, VP, TS, and so on. This gives you the letter sequence, and this gives you the numerical sequence, the values 130, 240, 350, and so on. Now, the Arabic structure is essentially the same, or it's similar with a slight twist. So instead of going 112, which ends up being 112.17 to give you Alf, yes, it goes 110.19. And that gives me then the letters EYK. And then because we're not dealing with a 22 but a 28 letter alphabet, I can add the final letter, which is GH. So I get 1, 10, 19, 28, which gives me the gematria values of 1, 10, 100, 1000. Now, this means that the GH is the final letter of the consonants, just as it is in some versions of Sanskrit. And that means that the next series of letters is 2, 11, 20, 3, 12, 21, 4, 13, 22, 5, 14, 23, and so on. And that gives me then EYK, GH, BKR, CL, SH, and so on. When I get to the appendices, I think it's appendix 3, where I talk about system, I will show you that these numbers are not coincidental. They are based on the nakshatras. Because the nakshatra for Ketu is 1, 10, 19. And so the structure of the nakshatras becomes the underlying hidden structure behind Arabic, and then becomes the way of restructuring the alphabets. And Hebrew, in the official story, is a 22-letter alphabet. But at some point, it became a 27-letter alphabet. And then you get 110.19, so that you can get this 110-100 gematria, and that then becomes Aleph, Yod, Kof, Beth, Kaf, Reth, Gimel, Lamed, Shin, so 110.19, 211.20, and so on. It's exactly the same structure as here. So if you read some of the general discussions of this, they'll say, of course, well, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was Hebrew, and the Hebrew is the structure that every other language copied. But in fact, it's the Arabic underlying structure, which historically we can trace back to 1400 BC, whereas the earliest Hebrew documented, or archaeologically documented letters go back to something like 1050, or there are claims that it goes back to 1500 or 1900, but that's not archaeologically proven. So what does the Arabic, well, what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is to show you the major alphabets of the West. And we're now dealing mainly with the Southern Arabic. Well, this is the classic Arabic, but we're going to go to the Southern Arabic and North African, and then come back to the others later to suggest to you that this normal arrangement, or if you go to the history books, they'll tell you that there are alphabets, A, B, C, D, where the vowels are in between, abjads, where, as in the Arabic, they go A, B, J, D, H, W, Z, and then there are syllabaries. Well, I'm going to suggest to you that it's more complicated than that, that the same letters get juggled into different positions. So the Arabic has two classic positions. One is that you take the shapes. So the first shape is A, the second shape is B, the second shape is T, and you notice that the A is this way, that way, or this way. Then the B is basically that letter lying flat. Then the T is the letter lying flat, but now with dots on top, the TH with 3 dots, and then the G, and so on. And that the most important letters are the 3 at the end, which are either WHI or HWY, and well, when you turn it around, these become letters 5, 6, and 10. So, just for fun, I take this and put it into 2 columns as well, and then we get AB, TTH, GHH, CHD, and so on. If we go to the classic ways of writing Arabic, there are 2. One is in terms of the shapes. This is called the numerical abjad value, where we're dealing with the shapes. So A, B, T, A, Ba, Ta, Tsa. Remember I showed you that there's, and then this is the numerical abjad value based on abjad value number. So this is letter 1, 2, 3, 4, ending up with 900 and 1,000. And that those last 3 letters, Ha, Va, and Ya, are now letters 5, 6, and 10. And it's those 3 letters that become the 3 letters of Yahweh. And if I take a 10 and put 2 V's, then I have one of the ways of doing Aleph. So, but to argue that the Arabic alphabet is only an abjad is to miss the whole point of the history. And if we go to Persian, we see that Persian, instead of having 22 letters or 28 letters, has 32 letters, so it's closer to the Sanskrit than, but the same basic principle. Now it's A, B, Pe, Te, Thay, Jim, Ke, He, and so on. But again, it's letter forms, and now there are 18 letter forms. And we again end, here we end with WHY. And so I'm saying we have 33 letters in Sanskrit. When they go to Persian, the first version looks like the Vargas. The more modern version rearranges this into terms of 18 shapes. Then we go to Arabic, and it goes to 17 shapes. Now, then when Arabic becomes, when Muhammad comes in the 7th century and Arabic becomes the lingua franca of the Arabic world and the Muslim world, then some subtle aspects of the Arabic go back and influence the Persian. So we have basically a story of going east, west, very far west, and then back to the Middle East, or to East Asia, or Middle Asia. So it's a going to and fro between these. So the Persian, like the Arabic, divides into a number of shapes. Normally 18 in Persian, sometimes 19, and the Arabic normally 17, but also sometimes 18 or 19. And so we can take, here's a transliteration of the Arabic and Persian together, and then again we can arrange those in these two columns in this way. Now, yesterday when we were looking at the early examples of Indicum, Chaldearum, Ethiopian, Amharic, and so on, we noticed a subtle change. Instead of AL, a BM, there was HL, HM. And when we go to the South Arabic early alphabets, especially Yemenite or Old Yemeni, we find that this same basic pattern, now with 22 letters or 24 letters, we have again HL, HM, QW, and so on. And we see two forms of the letters. We see the modern English writing and this almost pictographic writing, which they used for the making of monuments. It's a writing, we would call it a capitalized script. And they are linked with both the sun and the moon. So if I take the moon letters on their own and put them in one column, and the sun letters in another column, moon letters and sun letters, this is the effect I get. So what looks like completely chaotic here suddenly starts to look, remember our little men in the Russian case with this, and then what you would call the trishula, and so on. So what we're seeing is that there are multiple ways of writing these things. We can do it as a series of 3 lines. We can do it as a series of columns. We can do it as a series of columns that we separate out the moon and the sun. And then what looks like purely arbitrary signs starts to look a lot more systematic. The same happens if I take the so-called Muznad, which, as we recall from the very first lecture, is one of the 7 oldest languages, or alphabets of the Far East, the Middle East. And again, if I read it in terms of the alphabet of the Arabs, then it goes A, B, T, T, H, J, H, K, H, A, and so on. If I do it in terms of sun and moon, I get back to exactly those same symbols that we had in Old Yemenite. And of course I can write it this way and have it linked with the Gematria. If I go back, remember we said that it comes from the east, it goes to Africa, it's 33 letters, becomes 26 letters, becomes 22 letters, and then around 700 AD, the Greek goes back to the Coptic, and in 800 AD, that Coptic goes back to Ethiopian. So just as we have the Sanskrit going to Persian, going to Arabic, and then the Arabic going back to another version of Persian. So it's kind of boomerang effect. We have it going to North Africa, going north, and then 1,000 years later going back south again. And so if I take these 2 alphabets with which we ended one of the lectures, and I put these into a sequence, now I get AL, BM, GN, DS, and again I have ABGD, HW, HVZ, as in the abjad, but then that next section is CHTY rather than HTY, and then we have K. So, and this is 22, and then here is another way of writing that. So all of these things that look terribly different because the actual script is so different, when we get down to the underlying roots, we see that there are a lot more connections than we thought. And the same goes if I take Ethiopian Fidal and Arabic, then I see Hala, Hama, Sara, Saka, Bata, Naha, and so on. That in Arabic is Ha-Lam, Ha-Mim, Zal-Ra, and then the variants are Hoylaut, Haut-Mai. Now we have names for the letters rather than just calling them letters, but the structure is the same, and now it's instead of A-L, A-M, it's H-A-L, H-A-M, and then the rest goes on. So we must learn to read what looks like just a mass of letters, and people say is just a syllabary. We can see, actually, it's a series of different ways of writing the same thing. Some more popular, some less popular. And if we try to classify these purely in terms of one of the forms, which is what normally happens in these books, so we are told, oh, there are some alphabets, there are some abjads, and there are some syllabaries. Well, we get very confused because Sanskrit can be written as an alphabet, it can be written as a syllabary, and it can be written as an abjad. But it is not any of those three. It's something, the deeper structure is the one where it links with the sounds. So yet another way of presenting the system is to make a circle, and now start here and go around. And this is so-called Ethiopian alphabet wheel. And now I start here at 1 and go around like this, and then have different values at each level, and create not just a numerical value going from 1 to 100 or 400 or 1,000, but going all the way to 5,600. Or here, taking the 26 letters of Ethiopian with 9 vowels, again, I get Hoylau. Well, here's the letter version written out, and here is it just as individual letters that we're used to in the West. So HL, HM, SR, ST, BT, and so on. So it's now letter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So whereas Babylon goes letters 1, 12, 2, 13, 3, 14, in this version, I go 1, 2, and so on. And here now, yet another version. This is the 33 letters of Ethiopian. Now I go Hale, Hame, Sere, but if I translate that back, so here's the Ethiopian, here's the Arabic, here are variants, and here's the English. It's again AL, AM, SR, SH, QB, and so on. And numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And here are 2 examples of how they're done in the formal way. And if we look very closely, then you will see that this letter has the capital vowels A, U, E, A, E, yes, and I. And this one has all the small versions of the letters, A, U, E, A, E, I, O. So officially, this is called a syllabary. because you're spelling everything out. And it's supposed to be without vowels, but in fact, those two letters, the E and the I of the old Sanskrit that become the Hein and the Chain, become the framework for dealing with the vowels. And we're going to come back to that later. So here, just for fun, I take you to southern Africa, where there's a language, or middle and southern Africa, a language called Bantu, which is the lingua franca of middle and the south. And in fact, there are 1,400 alphabets just based on Bantu. And what's fascinating again is, if you look, it's A, B, T, H, C, H, D, and so on. It's almost like the Arabic, but there are these funny signs again, yes? Some of which are close to the Greek, and some of close to the Russian, so this looks like a B in the Russian. But if I now do it again, 1, 2, 3, 4, yes? I get this, and I'm back again to my, well, now the sequence is slightly different, but the point, the underlying reality is we have one way of writing as letters, one with sign letters, and there are these underlying structures. When we go to the north, we have the so-called Celtic languages. Now, the Celtic languages often write in one column of 16, and then you have a second column that looks similar, but these then are letters and linked to tribes, and these are the names of trees. And they have various names like British Ogon, Bobiloth, Beth, Louis, Neon, and so on. Now, one way of writing them, remember I was saying there was a way of doing this in terms of markings, and that in fact you had 5 basic sticks, and on the one you do certain letters, on another you do the other, on a third you do the vowels, and on a fourth you do the semivowels or the diphthongs, A, E, I, O, and so. So here you see the BL, this is B, L, F, S, N as regular characters. If I switch the orientation, these become capital characters. And here are uppercase numbers, which are also diphthongs. Now the tree alphabets, which we saw also came from India, remember? And then went to to Cairo, and then became the alphabets of Plato and Dioscorides. Here in this version of the tree alphabets, we get BLFSN that are these, and here are the English names of the actual trees involved, which we can arrange also as 13 trees of the year, and so on. So we have the word version, the letter version, the markings version, and the rune version, and of course the translation version. And these can, so I can again now do letter 1, 2, 3, 4, and I get B, L, F, S, N, D, and so on, yes, and I get this series. Or I can do 2, 12, 14, 6, 21, 8, and so on, and I get this series. And these then and can also be written out as full names. Now, here is a classic way of doing it. So I go down, and then I go back up, and then the final ones are the vowels. Yes? Akab, Oze, Ura, Ezu, Jaikim. If I now add just a J to these, this becomes Jacob, Joseph, Uriah, and Jesu. And so whereas these become the tribes of the Israelites. These become the 5 key tribes of the Old Testament. Because according to the Celts, at some point in around 1500 BC, they sent somebody to Babylon, and he collected 72 scholars again. And he tried to get the best of the old alphabets, and he created the Ogham. And so again, at a very deep level, the names of the Old Testament and the names of the Celtic are all connected. Now, we're told in the very far past that the Druids who made the Celts actually came from India. But that is a very long time ago. Now, what's fascinating is that we're used to having one alphabet, at school, and that's it. But not so in the Celtic tradition. You have one alphabet specifically for the sciences. So the same basic letters, B, F, N, D, C, and so on, become names of the sciences. Or here you have a Dath or color Ogham, and the same B, F, H, T, M become the names of the colors. Here you have a bird Ogham. First you have a date Ogham. So those same letters become the dates of the year, and including the solstices and so on. Well, the vowels become the solstices and the equinoxes, yes. And these also then becomes names. So you have a bird Ogham, and they become names of birds. And so if I wanted to be a learned Druid, I had to learn up to 80 different Oghams. So this is like an encyclopedia. I have my 22 or 24 letters, and then I use those letters to create 24 names of birds, 24 names of fish, 24 names of humans, 24 names of tribes, 24 names of everything. And so the 24 letters become basically the beginnings of a 24 encyclopedia. So the number of letters involved actually varies depending on where we are. In this particular case, we have 13 consonants and 5 vowels, so we have 18 letters. Some versions have 22, some have 24, some have 26, but the principle remains the same. And one of the most famous versions has B and J, and these become 2 columns, Boaz and Joachim, that we have then in the Old Testament and linking with the Freemasons and so on. And the one column is black and the other columns is white. One is night, one is day, one is clouds, the other is fire, the one is female, male, left, right pillar, mercy, judgment, north, south, silver, gold, strength, establishment, unity, binary. So what begins as 2 letters becomes 2 columns, and the 2 columns are the foundations not only of a temple, but in fact the whole of the universe. Interestingly enough, in the Slavic ruins, we also find 2 sets of columns, often with 2 sets of 9, and here in a modern set of runes, we again have the Armanen runes, we have 2 groups of 9. But there are many more runes, so here's a compilation of 38 different runes, and so the list can be as small as, let's say, 12, and then as much as 38. Now, to go into the whole history of that would go beyond the scope of what we're doing here. It's to show that any organization of letters can just be in a few rows, which can then be read in terms of the left column or the right column. That gives us short forms like ALPH or AIQ or so on. We can put it into columns, and the columns can then be in terms of the first letter and the 12th letter, well, the first letter and the second letter, the third letter and the fourth letter, or we can go 112, 213, and so on. So here I compare Slavic runes and Armanen runes, and again show their different letter combinations. Here we're with the Futhark. So the Futhark comes about, this is the 24-letter version. So I have F-U-T-H-A-R-K, if I write it out this way. But now I can put it as two columns, and I get F-U-T-H-A-R-K, and I get a different version. And here is what happens if I do those symbols and write the symbols in a row. And I can take a 33-letter version, which we have, or 34-letter version of the Futhark, which we have in England. And now that list goes from 1 to 17, so to halfway the alphabet, and then the second half is there. So now, instead of going 1, 2, or 112, I go 118, 219, 320, 421, and here are then the written out versions, and here are the symbol versions. Now, as a final example, I go back to probably a prehistoric time when, remember we were talking that in the prehistoric times there were all kinds of circles and even double spirals and so on. So now I take those, I can take those 24 and link it up to 24 motions, which is back to lecture 3 or 4, and do it this way. Or I can take this whole thing and make it into a series of circles. But now, instead of going 1, 2 or 112, I go 124. So I go to the uttermost ends of the circles. So the next one is 223. The next one is 322. The next one is 421. And then the final one is 1213. And this then gives me, here are the, this becomes Urfe, from which of course we also get Urfa. And remember the city of Antioch where Abraham came is San Liurfa, Urfa again. Ur is the beginning, and Fa is the full energy. So in terms of, this is the upside down U, and the Fa is what we would call the F today, yes? But now I read this as a symbolism: primitive bull, tamed cattle, nature, culture, night, day, sky, Asgard, earth, Midgard, structure, nature, fire, water, donor, recipient, harmony, collaboration, death, life, one, descent, tier, retention, winter, Niflheim, summer, Muspelheim, field, forest, womb, phallus. Now, this is extremely interesting because remember in our story, we were saying that we start with symbols. We take the symbols and pull them apart, and we have individual letters. We then combine them again, and we have new symbols. Well, here we are at a prehistoric date where these complicated symbols are, on the one hand, arranged as if they were part of a labyrinth, and on the one hand, they are letters which we can link to motions of the body, or mudras, but on the other hand, they are telling, this is like a primitive history of mankind. So what do you start with to get going? Please excuse the seeming vulgarity, but we begin in the middle, because that's where both the male and the female parts are that lead to our birth. So we begin in the middle, and as we move outwards, we go to field and forest, fire, nature, culture, and finally primeval bull and tamed cattle. And so we go from the beginnings of life to life in an agricultural society, all summarized in this primitive alphabet, which then can be put together in different ways, as we saw, and lead to the various versions. So in one of these early versions, A is drawn as an F, and L is drawn as an F with only one hook. Here are 4 different kinds of A's. Here are 4 different kinds of F's. And here is a version where the single line crosses with one where you have the 2 lines, from which, as we remember from lecture 4, you can create whole kinds of Ferni alphabets. So here we are at the end of this chapter, really, but we are at the beginning of the whole process. And so here I've just summarized those basic associations. So Ur and Fa, or Ur and Fe, wild and tame, beginning, end, past, present, primitive, tamed, ancestral property, movable wealth, primal nature, civilization, nature, culture, sun, moon, male, female. And so you have the whole of history summarized in these symbols that are also letters, which can then be rearranged in different ways to create the Western alphabets.